If listening to Unforgotten has inspired you to create your own podcast, you're in luck. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can make your own podcast and share it with the world.
And the Spotify platform makes it super easy to get started. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. So no matter where you are when an idea hits, you're ready to start recording.
Spotify for Podcasters makes it easy to distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Plus, you can do video podcasts and engage with fans through Q&A and polls. You can even earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions.
And best of all, it's free. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters and sign up for your free account to start recording and sharing your podcast with the world. Hey everyone, this is Sellers.
And this is Stormy.
And this is Unforgotten,
where each episode will highlight unsolved missing, murdered, and suspicious death cases in Alabama in order to raise awareness and hopefully obtain some answers for victims and their families.
Please remember that any individual referenced in the podcast should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law, and any opinions or views expressed in the podcast are solely those of participants. Listener discretion is advised, as some of the content discussed in the podcast may contain violence or graphic descriptions and may not be suitable for all audiences.
Be sure to subscribe to our Patreon channel for early access to Unforgotten episodes and bonus content. Your subscription will help support the efforts of ACCA in assisting families and raising awareness for Alabama cold cases.
Hey everyone, we're back, and we're so glad that you are too. As we were preparing to record this episode, there was a pretty shocking video released in the media related to the death of a Walker County inmate. If you follow our social media pages or the Secrets True Crime podcast, you're probably familiar with Walker County, as it's been a topic of discussions on numerous occasions.
One of the most concerning things about Walker County is the fact that no one seems to have a true and accurate record of exactly who is among the missing and murdered. For the ones that are known, there's not always a whole lot of information available. While locals may recall what happened or stories that have been told over the years, they're not always willing to share that information out of fear they'll be the next one to turn up missing.
Right. We talk about this a lot, about whether that fear is real or exaggerated, but those are sentiments echoed by more than just one individual. A question we always come back to, though, is what or who could instill that level of fear into the entire community of people, let alone a county?
And then the media releases a video that was preserved by Karen Kelly, a now former Walker County Sheriff officer, and as a result, she loses her job, and according to her attorney, has to go into hiding out of concern for her own safety.
Through Karen's actions and the efforts of Anthony's family, much-needed conversations are finally occurring. Last week, 2 complaints were filed in federal court on behalf of the estate of Anthony Mitchell and Karen Kelly against WCSO. The allegations in the complaint filed by the estate stem from the video surveillance recorded and released by Karen in the effort to preserve and provide the truth about Tony's final days. In response to Karen's efforts, WCSO terminated her employment. We will provide a link in the episode details to our blog where you can find links to the complaints, news articles, and also a timeline.
While what was revealed last week is not the subject of today's episode, we wanted to mention it because it is important. The allegations related to the treatment and death of Anthony Mitchell while in the custody of the Walker County Sheriff's Office has revealed an appalling and nearly unbelievable disregard for life. We know the statements are simply allegations at this point in time, and that everyone named should be presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. And that's a standard we fully believe should be upheld. However, the reprehensible actions or inactions reflected in the video surveillance and still shots by those sworn to protect and serve the community, free or incarcerated, are unconscionable.
We could probably have a full-on discussion about this today, but for now, as a concerned community, we wanted to make sure that this stays in the public eye and encourage you to continue following the events as they unfold so that you can keep informed.
We stand with Anthony Mitchell, his family, and also stand by Karen Kelly, the officer who was relieved of her duty due to her integrity, ethics, and bravery for preserving and reporting the absolutely inhumane treatment of Mr. Mitchell.
Now it's time to take you to Covington County, which is located in south central Alabama along the northern border of Florida's Panhandle. Our cases today are also both in the small town of Opp in East Covington County, about 85 miles south of Montgomery.
You know, not only are they both from Opp, which is strange enough because it's not really that large of a city, they also happened just a few years apart.
They did. Yeah, they're only 2 years apart.
Yeah. Parked on the Alabama-Florida line in southern Alabama, Covington County is located in the Gulf Coastal Plain region, which means it's mostly flat and marshy. In 2021, it was estimated to have around 37,500 residents. Only 24.59 square miles, Opp is one of 2 cities in Covington County and has an estimated population of about 6,700. There are other towns and communities, but Andalusia and Opp are apparently the only cities technically. For those who follow college football, Mike Dubose is from Opp. He was a head coach for the Crimson Tide at the end of the 90s and won the SEC championship in 1999.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Our first case is 17-year-old Kemberly Ramer, Kim, as she was referred to by friends and family. Her parents were divorced, and she primarily lived with her father, Kenneth Ramer. However, Kim spent a good deal of her summertime with her mom, Sue Ramer, now Infinger, in Leona, Florida, which was about 30 miles from her dad's. Kimberly was doing well in school, had lots of friends, enjoyed her activities after school, and seemed very happy. She was nearing the end of the last summer of her high school years in 1997, looking forward to being a senior at Opp High School that September, and excited to attend college in Mobile after graduation.
I remember getting out of school going into my senior year, that being kind of like one of those independent moments, like, oh yeah, I'm an adult, not really an adult, but you feel like you're an adult because, you know, like you're a senior, you're top of the class, like you roll in school, and then it's out kind of spreading your own wings. And college was just exciting.
Yeah. I bet she was feeling just wonderful summertime. I agree, though. I think that she was probably just feeling like she could rule the world. On August 15th in 1997, Kim had come back from her mom's earlier in the day. She had needed to get her senior pictures and then had a game in the city's women's softball league. Afterwards, she hung out with some friends and then went to visit her boyfriend. With her curfew, she left her boyfriend's just a bit before midnight, only a few minutes away from her home. This was the last sighting of Kim. It was said that a neighbor may have seen her arrive home sometime just before midnight, but even at that, it was not confirmed. It did seem, in any case, that it was safe to assume she made it home that night, as her car was parked out front, and there were items in her room that she would have taken with her had she planned to leave. You know, things like her purse, glasses, she had contacts also, so she didn't have either with her, and keys. So it seemed maybe that she had been getting ready for bed as well. Her shoes had kind of been kicked off and clothing appeared to kind of haphazardly be thrown on the floor. Just kind of like one does when they're first getting ready for bed.
Okay, that's weird. So no confirmed sighting after she leaves her boyfriend, except for, well, we don't know that the neighbor actually saw her make it home. That's just it's possible that they saw her. But her car is there, and since her car's made it home, you assume she's made it home.
Right.
And her things have made it inside. It's bizarre.
It is a little bizarre, yeah. Her father wasn't at home that night, so when he arrived back at the house in the morning, he didn't really think too much about not seeing her. It was pretty early at 6 a.m. So she may have just been sleeping. He left her a note and he picked up his golf clubs and left to go golfing. Later that day.
That kind of makes sense. He would see the car in the driveway.
Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't be up at 6 a.m. probably on the weekend at that age.
I'm not even a teenager and I don't get up at 6 a.m. unless I absolutely have to.
Right. Well, later that day, when he was back home, Kenneth had assumed that since she wasn't in the house at that time, that friends or her mom had picked her up and they had gone shopping or something. And, maybe she was even staying with one of them overnight on Saturday night. He said he was always reminding her to leave a note if she went somewhere. A few years later, an article from the Montgomery Advisor, August 17th, 2007, quoted him as saying, "She would have left a note for me. I was always reminding her to leave me a note. I even brought home a stack of notepaper not long before this happened." He left notes for her on Saturday so that she would leave a note when she got home. She didn't this time, though.
I wonder why he didn't just call her mom.
I kind of got the impression because he just seemed so, nonchalant isn't the right word for it, but almost like it was normal that maybe they came and went like this a lot. And that, the idea of leaving the note was just kind of a courtesy thing that they agreed to that she didn't always uphold. So he just didn't really make much of a thing of it. So by Sunday morning, now there has still been no contact with her. Kenneth did start to feel pretty uneasy and called Sue to see if Kimberly was there, which, of course, she wasn't. And they immediately start calling around to friends, and Sue headed back to Op, and then they together started reaching out further to their friends. However, many of them had already started to arrive at the house because, one phone call sets, a chain of reaction with teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were all heading that direction already for the most part. When Sue arrived, Kimberly's parents called the police. They figured out that she just was not anywhere that they could think of. And so they, filed a missing person report. Unfortunately, when the police arrived at the house, the scene had pretty much been contaminated because there were just so many people in the house trying to gather to help. And don't you think that's a pretty common thing to have happen?
Yeah, I think we hear about that quite a bit. Scenes don't get roped off,
mm-hmm.
or they don't get roped off in time, or maybe even before the investigators are called, without even realizing it, people have started walking through a crime scene. So the investigators, when they get there, have really no idea
mm-hmm.
what was actually within the crime scene before other people started entering it.
Exactly, yep. So
Quick question, though. Did the boyfriend, was he a friend they called?
There were some reports later on that they didn't really know the boyfriend very well. I think they knew he was there, and I think that they did end up calling him, I believe, but they don't really specifically mention it in the articles. Later on, they talk about talking to him and that sort of thing. So we do know that, he was interviewed and that her mom and dad talked to him and that sort of thing. But at the time, they don't really mention whether they called him right over and whether he was worried, that sort of thing. So when the bedroom and house started getting a good look over, it soon became pretty evident that there were signs of a struggle rather than just a teenager's messy room. Her bed was a bit more rumpled than normal. A pillow was in an odd spot behind her headboard. Clothes were more than just strewn about, like we thought originally. And there were actually pictures knocked off the wall in her room, like quite a few of them. And they also noticed all of a sudden that there was some in the hall as well. So it looks like...
That's actually what I was going to ask about earlier, was when you said things are kind of just haphazardly thrown, was it possible that somebody just threw those things in there? But I guess that is possible since it now...
Yep. And it kind of actually... I read an article a while back that said something to the effect of you could tell that like the clothes were not just strewn about, and not even just haphazardly, like if she didn't normally do that, they were just out of character for her, but like almost like you could tell that there was some sort of a fight going on, almost that like they were kind of bunched up in some places, and they actually could account for like all her shoes were there. They knew all her shoes were in the room, so they knew that she was barefoot when she left. All kinds of, little things. Wow. I couldn't find a consensus on what she was wearing that night, but it sounded like she may have been wearing like a white t-shirt and either some cut-off sweats or cut-off jeans. But that was about as far as they could really confirm as to what she was actually wearing.
Man.
So the police did gather a lot of evidence. They processed the whole scene for fingerprints and blood, luminol and all of that. But the scene actually was never blocked off. So anybody could have come and gone out of that room, out of the house in general, which is too bad. I mean, I think we've heard that a lot too, when there's a big crowd of people around that they just don't ever get to, protecting the scene, I guess, just so to say.
Did they get blood?
They implied that they actually did. Again, didn't specifically say that. Later on, they mentioned that they had evidence, that they were processing, but again, didn't say what that evidence was. So I'm kind of thinking that they may actually have DNA, but, back then they didn't have good testing. So I'm kind of curious if maybe they're in process of doing that now.
Yeah, and they could even, if they had fingerprints that weren't identified, it'd probably be a good idea to rerun those.
Yep. They did actually gather up the phone logs for the house phone. And it did seem that one of the things that gave them kind of a indication of what the person was doing while they were there, although it's still kind of curious, is that they seemed to make several phone calls while they were there. And they determined it really couldn't have been Kemberly because she didn't know they didn't know any of those phone numbers, and a lot of them were out of state to Florida. The people that she might know in Florida would have been known to Sue, and Sue didn't state that she knew any of those phone numbers. They actually haven't elaborated a lot on IDing them, so that also may be a part of the evidence that they're holding back.
Who makes a phone call from a crime scene?
Don't know.
Using the house phone.
Yeah, and not just one, like several phone calls. It was very odd. To me, it kind of makes me wonder if it doesn't mean that somebody that they knew, because maybe it wasn't so odd. They thought maybe it wouldn't be odd that the phone calls were made because of who it was. Maybe they weren't smart enough to realize that, these calls in the middle of the night that their daughter disappears might be odd, but...
Yeah, I would definitely venture to say they weren't very smart.
Yeah.
But then again, here we are. So they have gotten away with it for this long.
Sometimes I think people have dumb luck, to be honest.
Yeah.
Officially, it didn't look like anybody broke into the house. This is another kind of clue that maybe Kemberly may have known who it was. Even if, maybe it was somebody she didn't care for, but she might not have stopped them from coming in the house originally. Sue mentioned in a September 13th, 22 interview with a podcast called Crack House Chronicles that I know a name. I'm going to have to find out what that name means. She noticed that the door under the carport to the kitchen, which they always use, seemed to be slightly askew. She said, quote, "I could see a light, from the doorknob up. I could see a little light coming through." And another person at the house at the time noticed that as well, almost at the same time. And it wasn't like it was really damaged. It just looked like it was different than it had in the past, almost as if somebody had pressed really hard on the door and it kind of warped it slightly.
I wonder if it was one of those things where a lot of times, certain door handles, you have to wiggle it and push the door because of swelling from the weather or whatever. It gets stuck and you have to push it. So maybe they knew one, like either did that door get stuck? Did it have a tendency to get stuck and you had to put a little more force into it? And maybe somebody put a little too much force, or it didn't look like anybody broke in because they knew that was a solid way in. Yeah. Or was him trying to keep somebody out?
Yeah.
And they were trying to push in, because another thing that I was thinking was she left a little before midnight to come home before curfew. So were these whoever waiting? We don't know whether it was 1, 2, 3 people. Were they waiting for her when she got there? They come in after? Like, were they hiding out in the house? Right. I'd like to know what time the phone calls were made. I mean, were they just hanging out using their phone and like watching TV?
Yeah. Kind of makes you wonder.
Yeah. Maybe she caught them off guard.
That's very well could be. Yeah.
But that's interesting because that being in the garage or in the carport. I wonder, was it a closed off carport?
It
or was it kind of like an open?
Yeah, it didn't sound like it. They didn't have pictures of it, but the way she was talking, it sounded like that was just kind of like everybody kind of went to that door. So I would imagine it wasn't closed off.
I was just wondering if maybe neighbors could have seen.
Maybe normally, maybe during the day, but I wonder if it was maybe dark, at night.
Yeah.
So, the local police and sheriff's office, Alabama SBI, and the FBI all participated in the investigation, primarily led by the FBI due to the possibility of the crime actually maybe happening over state lines. They were pretty close to the Florida border, and, they weren't sure, based on the phone calls, if, somebody actually came from Florida, whether they may have taken her there, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The FBI also posted a $20,000 reward, and an additional $5,000 was granted by the governor's office. Tips did come in, quite a few. They said that there was hundreds of searches over the years covering land and water sources. So they did at least have a lot of leads and searches. It just didn't seem to lead anywhere. Seemingly the first promising lead came in mid-May of 1998, so just the next year after she had disappeared. The tip was that she would be found in a 35-foot water-filled basin in Leona, Florida, called Steep Hole. This town, Leona, of course, was where her mother was from, so it was, I guess maybe something that you would think had to do with the fact that her mom did live there, that maybe the tip came through there. Beginning on Kemberly's birthday on May 18th, they had a professional set of divers searching there for about 3 days. They had a cadaver dog present also who actually appeared to have alerted, but the divers didn't find her or anything, none of her possessions, anything.
And as far as they know, nothing of hers was actually missing.
No. I think that they also said that she was wearing some jewelry. So I think that was the one thing that they were really kind of watching for, because it might have been unique to her. Might have come up on like metal detectors or anything like that as well, or scans. Another tip came in a few years later in April of 2006, leading them to search a sinkhole near Ponce de Leon, roughly 16 miles from Leona. It also required divers to search for several days, but once again, unfortunately, nothing was found. And another tip actually came in beginning in March of 2015, several years later, that she might have been found in a well outside of town off Coffee County Road. I think it was 412. 8 hours of moving massive amounts of earth from the well site led again once to another dead end. Can you imagine moving all of that for a well, to get to the bottom of a well?
That's a lot. There was that case over in Georgia where a guy told them that they could find evidence in the bottom of a well, and they excavated it, and sure enough, the weapon and the t-shirt and shoes, I think, were in that will. So sometimes it's so worth it. But
yeah. As we have often heard in these cases where there's been so many years since a child has disappeared, sadly, sometimes parents haven't lived to see their child brought home. Kim's dad unfortunately passed away in 2010, never seeing her disappearance solved. The Dothan Eagle interviewed Kenneth in March of 2004, before his passing, and quoted him, "There's not a day that passes that I don't think about something Kim said, or look at her photograph and get misty. She knows I love her. I know she's in heaven. In my heart, I know she's in heaven, and it may be then that I see her."
God, that'll break your heart.
I know. I read that and I was, how true, unfortunately, it was. But maybe between the two of them, they can watch over the rest of the family and maybe they'll find her.
Yeah.
Over the years, Kimberly's mom has had a strong suspicion that a past family friend is who she believes killed her daughter. She wouldn't publicly state this until actually last fall in 2022. She shared her thoughts on the same podcast I mentioned earlier, Crack House Chronicles. I won't name the person here because he has not been formally named a person of interest in public. And so, I don't want to do that until we have, confirmed from law enforcement, really. But this person apparently was essentially the only person out of many people that were interviewed and many that actually took polygraphs. He was the only one that didn't cooperate.
Okay. Well, when you don't cooperate with the investigation, that kind of sends red flags up.
It does, yeah. It makes me wonder, did they not have enough? I mean, obviously they didn't have enough evidence because he's not in jail and we don't know who he is yet. But, it kind of makes you wonder what it is that's missing that they can actually, try to get that kind of evidence to bring forth his name.
I know I never understand not cooperating with an investigation if you're innocent, because the truth doesn't change.
I know. It seems like it's so much harder. It's definitely harder, I think, to keep up a lie than it is to keep up the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you're not flying under the radar whenever you decide, nope, not going to be cooperative. Yeah. If anything, it's like waving a big bullseye around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which,
granted, that there's a right to that. You have the right to counsel and to not. Mm-hmm. I get it.
And, they always say don't take polygraph. So, you can take or leave that as you wish, but, I'm not sure if I would do a polygraph. I still kind of think, no, I probably wouldn't, because every true crime story I ever have heard of, it's always been, people that take polygraphs get themselves in trouble.
I can't even give an interview without my heart rate and things jumping up.
I know.
I get so nervous and anxious. So I'm not even, part of me wants to do a polygraph one day just to see what it's like.
Yeah.
But I feel like I would fail out of the just sheer nerves and anxiety, and probably start telling things that were completely irrelevant about things. Like, yes, I ate that cake my mama baked when I was 5 years old and I lied about it. Actually, I didn't do that, but my brother did.
I mean, we know from a lot of wrongful convictions too that, that kind of stuff does happen, or they're feeling guilty about something that's even completely unrelated, but maybe they feel they'll get caught, somehow on. Mm-hmm. So, I'm certainly not a polygraph expert, so I don't know how easy it is to discern one thing from another, but I don't know. I don't know that I would do one, but
maybe we can get a polygraph expert to come on and talk to us.
Oh, that would be neat. I would love cool. that. It'd be interesting to hear their perspective.
Yeah.
Well, prior to all of this, in July of 2021, a grand jury actually met. They reviewed all the information from the case and revealed pretty much that there was actually progress in the case, but no one still has publicly named a suspect. The DA, Walt Merrill, gave a detailed statement about the grand jury report to the press, explaining that they couldn't really reveal the details due to the ongoing investigation. But they did share that they have hired a highly honored retired chief detective, that they made an investigator on the case, Dennis Haley. As quoted in the Andalusia Star News, he also made the following statement. Per the grand jury's instructions, we will reconvene and present the next phase of the evidence we have discovered in the near future. I am confident that we will find justice for Kemberly Ramer. We will not rest until we do. It's been 2.5 years since the grand jury, and we haven't heard an update yet. Kemberly has been missing for over 25 years, and her family just wants Kemberly to come home and be put to rest.
That's a long time. 2.5 years seems like a long time, too.
I was thinking so, too. I'm kind of wondering what's holding it up. I guess we've heard other grand juries that we thought we were going to hear from that we essentially never heard from again. So I guess maybe, patience. But
I don't really understand the next phase, but maybe that's just because I know a lot of grand juries proceedings are held in secret anyway, and they don't make a lot of that public. There's a lot of reasons for that, and I get it, because if an indictment doesn't come down, you don't want to sully somebody's good name by having it out there that they were even being discussed in connection to an indictment, potential indictment.
Yeah. You never know. Maybe somebody hears in the podcast today will help spark something, and maybe, the investigation will start pushing forward again. It'd be nice if we could help with that, or just anybody can get that information to the right people and bring Kemberly home. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Kemberly Ramer, please contact the FBI at 251-438-3674 or the Aub Police Department at 334-493-4511.
Over 23 years ago, James Anthony Reynolds, also known as AMP, went out with a group of friends for an evening of drinking, dancing, and laughing. But in the early morning hours of May 8, 1999, things took a tragic turn when the group of 6 vanished on their way home. The search for the missing 6 captured attention locally and nationwide for months, and the mystery surrounding their disappearance only intensified when the Chevy Caprice the group had been traveling in was discovered submerged in Pea River with the remains of only 5 of the 6 friends still inside.
Oh.
Yeah, isn't that strange?
That was really odd that only 5 of them were there.
I think that was when I first read the article, that was my response. Oh.
I mean, you're thinking of a car traveling along with 6 guys in the car. I mean, that's kind of a tight fit anyway.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to how that happened.
My grandmother used to have a Chevy Caprice. Those are big cars, so it's pretty spacious on the inside, but that's still a lot of people to have in a car.
Yeah, I agree.
So in May of 1999, Lamar Jr. Stackhouse was the proud new owner of a 1986 Burgundy Chevrolet Caprice. Well, new to him, because we're talking about 1999 and it was in 1986. But it was loaded with top-of-the-line stereo equipment. I think I even saw that it had gold rims on it. And he was ready to show it off. He had stopped by his father's home to let him see the car because he just purchased it, I think, a few weeks prior. So he stopped by his dad's before getting ready to head out for the evening with friends. It's a little unclear exactly what day this occurred. Some reports indicate that Stackhouse stopped by his father's on Friday, and that would have been May 7th. Then other reports state the group went out on May 8th and vanished in the early morning hours of May 9th. So it's a little bit unclear, but what is clear is that this happened between May 7th and May 9th. They either went out Friday night and vanished the early morning hours of Saturday, or they went out Saturday night and vanished the early morning hours of Sunday.
Okay.
When I say that the articles are a little confusing, literally one article had 2 conflicting dates in the same article.
Oh, my.
Yeah. So around 9 p.m. that evening, Tamara Monique Ward dropped her child off with a relative in Enterprise and met up with Angela Roberts Young, Eula Lee, and Valerie Jones McCoy at Lee's apartment in Enterprise. Around 11 p.m., the 4 women set out for Stackhouse's home in Enterprise, where they were later joined by Amp Reynolds. At 11:50 p.m., Ward used Stackhouse's phone to call her relative and check in on her child. According to the relative, Ward planned to spend the night with McCoy and pick up her child the following morning. According to early media reports, the group of 6 arrived at the Hideaway Club in Opp around 1:15 a.m. on May 8th. They paid their cover charge and joined the crowd inside. Witnesses that were also at the club claimed that the group appeared to be having a really good time. They were drinking, dancing, cutting up, laughing. And then around 3 a.m., Larry Edwards, who they called Mr., and was the security for the club, began ushering people out of the club because it was closing time. It's 3 a.m. So he tells the Birmingham News that he could hear an engine being revved up outside. So he looks outside and he can see a visibly drunk Stackhouse behind the wheel of his Chevy Caprice.
Ooh, that's bad news.
It is bad news. And so Edwards claims that he tells Stackhouse he better let someone else drive that car, and that one of the women in the group traded places with Stackhouse. Authorities believe that may have been Tamara Ward, but there's really no way to know that for sure, and I don't think it's ever been confirmed that any other witnesses were able to verify that. And the group left the Hideaway Club a little after 3 a.m., headed to an unknown destination.
That's a group of people that I'm not sure should be in a car.
So on May 10th, when none of the group had arrived back home, they were reported missing. I'm not really sure who reported them missing. Stackhouse's dad tells some of the media outlets that he and Stackhouse had plans to go to a sporting event and that he had been trying to call his cell phone, which is odd because we talk about that there really aren't cell phones during this time, but I guess he had one. But he wasn't getting an answer.
Imagine, Tamara, she had a child, right?
So only 2 of them didn't have children. Eula Lee had 2 children. Valerie McCoy had 5 children. Tamara Ward had 2 children, and Amp had a child. But yeah, supposedly Tamara Ward was going to be picking up her child the next morning.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So somebody reports them missing. One of the family members recognizes they're not back like they should be and reports them missing to the Enterprise Police Department, I'm assuming, because it's really not even clear who they reported them missing to. But it seems like Enterprise Police Department took the lead in the investigation. They were the ones that were making most of the comments. So I think that's probably who did the initial investigation. They're not who currently has it, though.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Authorities began searching a 45-mile radius, including aerial searches, but found nothing. I'm assuming the 45-mile radius also went from the Hideaway Club where they were last seen. So the logical assumption would have been that the group would have been headed back to Enterprise because it was 3 a.m. and they would have been going back to Stackhouse's home because that's where everyone had met up. And to get there, they would have had to cross Pea River and a few other small creeks. So cadaver dogs and search crews were dispersed to the waterways for the first time on June 3rd.
Really? Only June 3rd?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Almost a month later.
That's a long time to wait.
It is. And this is probably part of the reason why there was kind of a big deal about the investigation. I'm not saying the Enterprise didn't handle the investigation appropriately. I don't know whether or not they handled the investigation appropriately. But there was a representative from the NAACP that came in and requested that the FBI come in to handle the investigation because they felt like the missing six weren't getting the attention that they should get. Uh-huh. And when you consider that waterways and things like that weren't searched until almost a month later, I can understand why one would think that.
I agree. I mean, it's not like even there was just one person missing and they kind of neglected the investigation, but there were 6 people missing.
6 people. So 3 months in, with little to no leads, investigators actually sought the help from a TV show most of us have at least heard about if we haven't watched it, America's Most Wanted. Enterprise investigator Byron Kaler told the AP, "We really want to get this shown on America's Most Wanted because they get the best results. If we can't get it on that, we'll look at some other show." But I'm not really sure you want to hinge your investigation on a TV show.
Yeah, I mean, it does help get the information out, but yeah, I wouldn't say let's wait for the show, type of a thing.
But maybe that's one of the internet wasn't a big thing. Social media wasn't around in the late 90s. So
true.
Shows like this were the social media.
They really were. Yeah. I know. I watched them all.
Just based on the information that the investigators had, they stated they had no reason to believe foul play was involved in the disappearance of the missing 6. Despite that, they convinced the then governor, Don Siegelman, to offer a $10,000 reward for information leading to an arrest if foul play was involved.
Okay. That's weird.
It is weird. Because we've submitted...
If they don't think there's foul play, then why even suggest that there might be if you were pretty certain?
Yeah. Because they can word it to like the whereabouts. If somebody just saw a wreck happen.
Yeah.
Or something like that, they could have worded it differently. But that is weird. Yeah. And we've helped families go through the request for a proclamation on the governor's website to try to get a reward issued. And as far as I know, none of them have actually heard back. But to make it even stranger, on September 11th, they increased that reward to $20,000.
Oh, my heavens. Wow. I mean, not to say that it isn't worth putting a missing person's reward out there because, we still want to bring them in, and if somebody can bring them in, then obviously it's worth that probably. But
the problem is now that it's hinged on if foul play was involved.
Yeah.
You can't just helping find a missing person isn't going to get you the reward money. Mm-mm. You only get the reward money if foul play was involved.
Yeah.
But does that mean that they really think foul play was involved?
Seems like it would be, but
that's just strange wording to me.
Yeah.
Maybe we just haven't looked far enough back, but I don't think I've ever seen something written that way. As usual, rumors circulated about what could have become to the missing 6. And earlier press reports seemed to hone in on one particular rumor, that the disappearance was drug-related. Stackhouse had an extensive criminal history and had been convicted of dealing cocaine. He'd previously served 2 years in prison before being released on a 5-year probation in 1995. He'd actually requested an earlier release because he'd went through a drug program while he was in prison and claimed that he had turned his life around. His early release request was denied, but the same year that it was denied, he ended up getting out of prison on the 5-year probation, which kind of seemed to defeat the purpose of denying his request.
Yeah, it does.
But according to the Mobile Press Register, those good intentions kind of fell off once he got out. He was repeatedly arrested for various charges over the next 4 years, including drinking and driving, possession of cocaine, and selling cocaine to undercover agents. They also reported that Coffee County court records indicated Stackhouse told authorities his drug supplier was a Jamaican who resided in Palm Beach, Florida, and that Stackhouse had offered to set him up. Apparently, they asked Enterprise Police Department about this because one of Stackhouse's cocaine charges had been dismissed at the request of Enterprise Police Department, but Detective Kaler had declined to comment on whether Stackhouse was a police informant.
I was just going to say, that sounds like an informant to me.
Well, of course they're not going to confirm that.
Yeah, I guess they can't, right?
But it does lend some credibility to the theory because he was also due in court a month after his disappearance on 2 cocaine sale charges.
Okay. Well, that seems kind of coincidental.
Yeah, like he disappears a month before he's due in court on these charges. Amp also had a criminal record that included drinking and driving, possession of a controlled substance, and leaving the scene of an accident. According to reports, at the time of his disappearance, he was also on probation for selling cocaine at Enterprise. I don't know if that's how the two of them knew each other.
Yeah, they almost like they ran in the same circles somehow, or
yeah, it's possible. Amp was actually from Webb, Alabama, which is in Houston County. So he wasn't technically from Enterprise. Maybe he had moved there. I'm not really sure. But you would assume they would know each other somehow, and this could have been how. But considering their history, that would obviously fuel rumors that the disappearance would have been related to some drug connection.
Yeah, that sounds like it to me. I mean, it sounds plausible to me that would be the case. Definitely, but the problem with this, understandable. Yeah.
The problem with that, though, is that there's 6 people missing and a vehicle. They've always said there's nothing to indicate foul play, but they also said they weren't ruling it out. So when you think about it, and the weird wording with the reward and everything, it almost makes you wonder, was there a little bit more to it that maybe they weren't necessarily wanting to put out to the public until they could get evidence related to it.
Right, yeah.
Not long after the reward increased, investigators caught a break in the search. The summer drought had caused a significant decrease in the water levels of Pea River, and divers were able to locate Stackhouse's Chevrolet Caprice upside down just off a sandbar about 50 feet away from Ballard Bridge on Alabama 134 in the, I'm probably going to mess this up, Eno community. I've never heard of that, so I apologize if anybody lives there and I did not say it right. It's only 8 miles away from where they were last seen, and it's located between Op and Enterprise, so it would have been on the way home.
Oh, yeah.
This was also an area that had been searched twice previously.
Oh, really? Oh, well, that's interesting. I guess they couldn't not find it if the water levels had dropped.
Apparently, the water level at the time that it was searched initially was around 20 feet. Mm-hmm. And then when it decreased, it dropped down to about 10 feet. So, I mean, that does make a difference.
Yeah.
But the crazy thing about this is they had searched the area twice. Authorities said they had found no wreckage or debris along the road or embankments, no skid marks, no damage to the bridge, and no tire treads in the dirt. Stackhouse's father, Woodrow Stackhouse, claimed he had searched that area back in May, and he did find tire tracks near the edge of the water and had reported it to the authorities. But he did agree that he had seen no skid marks or any kind of trees with any kind of markings indicating there had been some sort of accident. And he thought maybe someone had actually rolled the car into the water.
So regardless, no resistance to the car going in the water, but just aren't sure how it got there.
Right. The investigators said the damage to the car, because there was damage, the front windshield and the driver window, those are missing based on the pictures. And then based on some content in the article, at least the passenger side window was gone. I'm not sure about the other windows. I can't see like the back windows. But damage from the car led investigators to believe that whoever was driving the car that night, when they left the Hideaway Club, I guess there's a curve before the bridge, and that whoever was driving didn't see the curve before the bridge and ran off the highway and down a steep embankment into the river.
Well, that would make sense. I mean, if
But the
got
car's
that kind of
flipped.
a turn, but yeah, the flip thing gets me though.
Yeah, it does, because you would think that's almost like they rolled down a hill, like they lost control. But you would think there would have been some broken trees or something. But maybe I need to go for a Google Drive down the road to see what it looks like.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of the Keely Rodney.
Oh, yeah. Actually, yeah. And I guess the area was obviously fairly dangerous because shortly after the car was discovered, Governor Siegelman announced they would be replacing that bridge. The bridge that was there at the time was too narrow and not up to modern standards. And the Birmingham News reported that 4 people had died previously in crashes on that bridge. I'm assuming that it's one of those narrow roads that's not well lit, pretty curvy, and in a flat area. When it's dark like that, you won't even see those curves until you get up onto them. So I can understand why they would think it would have just been an accident and they would have just went off the embankment. But it does seem strange that the car was upside down.
Yeah, and they were drinking.
Yeah. So you would think that losing control would have been more plausible, which would make you think. I mean, you can tell there's trees around this area in the picture, so it's not wide open. There's no skid marks, so they didn't hit the brakes. So did they go airborne? And I don't know. I don't know how high up the embankment was. It does look like there was a hill there. There's a picture kind of the investigators standing up on this hill when they're winching the vehicle out of the muddy water. And you can tell that there's an incline there. But I don't know what the exact height. That might be something to look into.
I mean, if they had some momentum going into the water and the water was high.
And it was 20 feet. It was high. The water was high. It could have pushed it that far. Then because it looks kind of like it was between the bank and there's a sandbar and like maybe it got stuck between the two.
Yeah.
One article mentioned that there were alligators in the water, which isn't surprising. There's alligators all over here.
Yeah, I didn't really think about that.
Yeah. But the windows were all busted.
Yeah.
So it had to make impact with something besides the water, right?
I would think so.
Because you would think that if the door windows like were rolled down already, they would have just calmed out if they were already down.
You would think,
the fact that they're open and nobody gets out makes you think that they probably weren't down.
A lot of ifs, huh?
Yeah, that's actually, now my brain's on this. It was initially believed that the remains of all 6 were still inside the vehicle, but forensic experts were only able to identify 5 of the 6 friends in the remains that were recovered. Investigators stated they did not believe the amp would have floated out of the window and down the river. The remains are inside of the vehicle. So one would assume that would be unlikely to occur, because if that was possible, why wouldn't other people have floated out?
Right.
He wasn't really a small guy either. He was 6'1", about 180 pounds. So it seems Like, that would have been kind of hard for him to float out of a window.
Yeah.
Intentionally get out of a window, sure. But if everybody else was still in the car, it seems like that would be unlikely.
Agree.
And I think probably what really kind of sends that home is the fact that forensic experts could literally find no evidence that Amp had been in that vehicle when it entered the river.
Oh, okay.
So if that's the case, what happened to Amp?
That's $1 million question, isn't it?
Yeah, because there were witnesses who said he got in that vehicle. Authorities had planned to re-interview the witnesses who said they saw him getting in the car with the group while also continuing to search the area where the car was found. But still, a month after discovering the car and the remains of Stackhouse, Lee, Ward, Young, and McCoy, investigators stood by their opinion that there was nothing indicating foul play was involved, and that they believed the car plunging into the river was just a tragic accident. The physical examination of the remains recovered showed no evidence of trauma, such as bullet holes or stab wounds. And in July of 2000, authorities officially called off the search for Amp.
So they're just assuming that whether it was likely or not that he did probably just float out the door and gave up.
Reporter asked, did they think Amp was alive? And they said they wouldn't speculate.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So is the case officially closed, or?
Nope, he is still listed in the NamUs and Aaliyah databases as an involuntary missing person.
Wow.
You know, it just blows my mind because they searched this river. Well, obviously they searched it for a little while. But I think they said divers went down on 3 separate occasions collecting remains. Because there were remains in the car, but some had also fallen out. So they continued going back down.
Yeah.
But that almost seems like maybe the water current wasn't quite as fast as what you would think it would be.
Or it could be different at different times of the year, though, too.
Maybe, and maybe they got
if it
pushed
was
up
lower,
into,
you know.
Yeah, the sandbar's there, so maybe it kind of formed a barrier. But none of that stuff, none of the remains that they collected matched up with him.
I have a question. Well, no, this is going to sound like a conspiracy theory, but, you know, it makes me wonder if one of those guys was a Stackhouse, they thought possibly could have been an informant. I kind of wonder if Amp maybe was, and that's why we can't find him.
Oh, that he was an informant?
Mm-hmm. You know, maybe he's been hidden away or hidden away in a not so nice way.
Yeah. And you know, as much as like WITSEC is good because it protects people, at the same time, I wish there was a way you could let families know without letting them know, you know?
Exactly, yeah.
I know there's
you
not.
get it because you're protecting the families, but yeah, it is.
But that's hard.
And I'm sure, you know, that's probably not the case.
And that's a far stretch. You know, that's just an assumption. We have no idea that that's actually the case. But it's just weird that 6 people leave, 6 people disappear, but only 5 are found. And there's no evidence that he was ever in the car. You have this strange damage to the car. The windows are missing. If they were broken on impact, when the car hit the water, if the windows were already broken, wouldn't somebody have tried to get out?
That was my big thing, as you would think. Now, you know, again, windows being broken, we have no idea really what they tried to do. I would be very interested to find out how they just determined that he wasn't in the car. Because I'm thinking, you know, a lot of guys, they carry nothing with them. They might have keys with them in their pocket and a wallet. So what makes them decide that he wasn't there? I mean, if everything was in his pockets and he left out the window somehow, I mean, again, far stretch that he could have, but we don't know that.
I don't know where that river, I haven't looked at it to see where it washes out at or where it ends up at, but I would assume they checked all of that.
You would think,
they, followed it down.
Or, heaven forbid, I mean, this is a gruesome thing to say, but, we talked about alligators.
Yep.
So
that was part of why I mentioned that. Now, there's a comment in the article where they are discussing that they officially called off the search, and Amp's father comments that he thinks they'll find Amp whenever they rebuild the bridge. But that's been a long time, so I'm assuming that bridge has been rebuilt and he wasn't found. So
yeah,
it's just weird.
This is definitely a mystery.
It is.
All disappearances are, but this is kind of a puzzle, so to say.
Yeah. 20 years later, the location of James Anthony Amp Reynolds remains unknown, and he continues to be in the NamUs and ALEA databases as an active involuntary missing person. If you or someone you know has any information related to the whereabouts of Amp Reynolds or what occurred in the early morning hours of May 8th or May 9th, 1999, please call the Alabama State Bureau of Investigation at 800-228-7688 or submit an anonymous tip on their website.
Unforgotten is an Alabama cold case advocacy podcast recorded in conjunction with Riverside FM, hosted and distributed by Anchor FM, available on your favorite podcast platform. Intro music for the show was created by Principles of Uncertainty, who also mixed and mastered this episode. Content and production is by Sellers and Stormy, artwork by Sellers. Credits for music, sound clips, special mentions, and any source referenced in our podcast can be found in each episode's description. We hope you will join us on all the major social media sites and continue to raise awareness of our Alabama cold cases. Until next time, thank you for listening to Unforgotten.